an original.
From Story Studio Network.
I want you to think about this. Canadian forestry has a role to play in saving the planet.
Absolutely. The answer is yes.
Welcome to this Story Studio Network podcast series. I'm Dave Trafford. In this series, Aaron Trafford and I will explore a number of ideas that hinge on the notion of Canadian forestry helping to save the world.
There's no path to a net zero carbon economy without the forest sector and forest products, full stop.
We'll talk about how and why Canadian forests have the ability to shift the climate crisis and the economy to build a better future.
There is no machine and no process known to man better than a tree that's sequestering carbon.
We'll explore innovations in forest management that drive a green economy and directly address the climate issue.
We have a significant amount of the world's forest land. With that privilege comes the responsibility of taking care of it.
So welcome in to this special series produced for Forestry for the Future. Okay, just before we start, coffee?
Absolutely.
There we go. And another one. Now, you do not take sugar, right?
No. Straight up black.
Okay, so I'm the only one here that takes the sugar, so I'll just deal with that. All right. That's my dad always used to do that. Do you ever notice that? Remember, he used to tap the spoon on the side of the cup. He would always do that. And of course, he's been ever present through this series. So there's Dad in the show today. There you go. So here's where we're at. We're all set, and we've poured the coffee, and we would encourage you to do the same. This is a little longer episode than normal. It's our kitchen table round table, and we're going to get into some of the general perceptions that normal Canadians, people like you and your kids and your family, have about forestry and the challenges posed by climate change.
So before we do this, though, can we just draw the curtain back a little bit?
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Wait a minute. There's a curtain?
Full disclosure, in case it isn't already abundantly obvious, is that we recorded this conversation a few weeks ago. And in fact, as we're talking to you now, we've recorded nearly all of the interviews and produced a pretty good portion of the episodes for this series already. So we know what's coming. And better yet, we know what you're going to hear in this episode. And so we've already mentioned this is a little bit longer than the other episodes, but it's simply because there's so much to say. And we assembled some really smart, curious people for this discussion. So first off, I want you to meet Matt.
My name is Matt Wynot from Nova Scotia. I work in politics as my day job.
There are kids in your house?
I have 3 kids, yes. Morgan, Andy, and Nathan. 11, 9, and 6.
Candace is a mom of adult children in Ontario.
My name is Candace Sampson. I am the owner and host of What She Said Talk, which focuses on issues that women are keenly interested in. And I typically only have females join my show to discuss them. Climate is huge for me. It consumes a lot of my time thinking about it, actually. So this is an important topic for me.
Alison is also here. She brings us a great perspective from beautiful British Columbia.
I'm Alison Tedford-Seaweed. I'm a mom from Abbotsford, BC, and I work in marketing communications and learning and development around Indigenous issues, and I come from a family of master carvers, so trees are really culturally important to us.
And then we round things out with Rob, who brings his decades of experience in the forestry sector to our kitchen table round table.
My name is Rob Keane. I'm a registered professional forester, been practicing forester for some 40 years, which is a bit scary. And I'm currently the CEO of Forest Ontario.
The CEO of the Forest. Coolest job ever.
So who knew? CEO of the Forest. I'm already learning stuff here.
Well, the thing is, Rob is the perfect guy to have at the table. You'll hear why. because we're going to roll through this discussion. And I think it's important for you to listen to like a few things that are going to crop up as themes and aha moments as we go. So Matt, Candace, and Alison, like you, all share a concern about climate change. I don't know if I've ever met anybody who's just not concerned about it at all, right? So they're all here because they want to do their part. But it's also super interesting to hear them talk about how they feel the enormity of this challenge.
Yeah, there's almost a fatigue that's built in around this subject, and even maybe some cynicism you're going to hear about plans or the policies, particularly at political levels, to cope with the crisis.
The conversation takes what I think is a super interesting turn when we start to introduce this whole idea that forestry and wood products play a significant role in that climate change battle.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me to hear Matt's concerns, particularly around harvesting trees and how he framed that.
It sounds like clear cutting isn't a good idea.
Then, on the other hand, we had Alison, you're going to laugh when you hear this, tell us about her son's reaction to tree harvesting.
When he was a toddler, we went to see the Lorax, and he saw all these people that were getting all upset about them cutting down trees, and he's kind of like, but that's like the best thing ever.
But the aha moment for me in this session was when Candace had her own aha moment.
I'm going to walk around and hug all my wood furniture in the house, and I'll share that with my kids.
And don't want to spoil anything. You need to experience her aha moment for yourself. But as Candace told us in her introduction, climate change is front of mind for her. It's an important issue for her and her family. She's paying attention. So it was kind of cool to see the lights go on for her.
So I dare say we all learned something during the course of the roundtable, but by no means did we solve all the problems. I mean, I don't even think we came close to solving problems.
No, but what we did do is manage to address some of these misperceptions, misunderstandings about forestry. And we also got a sense of where forestry's frontline role in this fight against climate change is happening right in plain view.
Yeah, I think that's where the really, this is happening and I can affect change. And I didn't even know I was doing it in the meantime. So here you go. Pour your second cup in case you need it. There you go. I've just overflowed in case you need another one. Settle in for the next 40 minutes or so. And we'd really like your feedback on this episode. So listen closely. And at the end of the whole thing, send us a comment. We really do want to hear what you think once you've had a full chance to listen.
Here's what I will just throw into the middle of our virtual table, our podcast table right now, is this idea that, and I even challenge whether it is an idea or a reality, Canadian forests can save the world. What do we think about that? Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think I think that's possible. Look at our vast, the second largest country in the world. We have, and we have 36 million people living here. And look at what we have. I think it could be exciting that is true. But obviously, just with everything else going on with climate change, we have the ability to do it, whether in the private sector or through government.
Mm-hmm. Like, I just had never had the thought before. Candace, I see you like nodding your head.
I think I have some ingrained cynicism in me at this point. I've covered climate a lot on my show. I read a lot. I've read Bill Gates' book, How to Avoid, a Climate Crisis. I'm always picking up books, always investigating. And I think I have a lot of cynicism because I see the average person like myself and Alison and Matt, yourself, I'm sure, making changes in their home every day, trying to make these changes, and then seeing, billionaires literally causing more climate stress than I could ever do in my lifetime in probably one flight around the world kind of thing. Like I am hopeful, but also discouraged because I just don't know if the political will is there, because there seems to be so much pushback from people with money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I'm cynical.
We're also very Canadian because I feel like everyone's going to say, I'm sorry, but this is a scary topic, right? Like it's a very Canadian response to have. Alison, what's your visceral response to saying Canadian forests can save the world?
I had the opportunity to have a really great conversation with Métis artist Christy Belcourt, and she was talking about, how the earth can, heal itself if we give it a chance. But she kind of echoed Candace's sentiments around like, we can do all of the things individually, but we also need, industry and folks that have more impact to also come to the table. And like, how do we politely ask them from a Canadian perspective? Would you mind terribly? Well, so that's a concern. And I mean, I also like, I get a little bit worried sometimes because often the individual responsibility pieces around environmentalism tend to spark like a different type of consumerism. And also, the solutions don't always consider the kitchen table realities of families that have affordability struggles. So finding solutions that are accessible to people and don't require people to spend more money for things that make a smaller impact than actually changing law and policy that would get folks who can actually make a difference to do something different. Right?
So let me ask the question then to the three of you before we go to Rob. When Aaron poses the question, how do you respond to the idea, the notion that forestry can save the world? Can you see a thread that we can pull from forestry to actually mitigating the climate crisis? Candace?
I think that it can absolutely save the world, not just here. I mean, around the world, forestry, the rainforest and the Canadian forest. And these are all really important ecosystems in the world. And I think they can save the world. And it's shown that, they pull carbon out and they're great for that. But I just, on the flip side of that, I worry if we have the will to push people towards saving our forests as well. I mean, in Ontario right now, we're seeing where the Ford government has pushed through the sale of the Greenbelt. He's selling it off to the highest bidder. And ask me how I feel about Doug Ford, and I'm going to tell you, because I am disgusted with his government and how they're pushing this through. So, yeah, save the world, but are we going to do it? I don't know.
So if I told you, Matt, that in the context of that, and Candace makes the point, and we hear it often, we would need to focus on saving the forest if we're going to save the world. So we should stop harvesting, don't cut trees?
No, I mean, not at all. In fact, there are so many jobs that people's livelihoods are tied to the primary industry of forestry. They'd be like shutting down the fishery here in Nova Scotia. Like there's just no, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people that their livelihood is, their day-to-day life is depending on the forestry. So no, I don't think so. I think that as I'll use my political hat here, I think that's where government comes in to help create frameworks and have goals and meet those goals around the sustainability of our forests. Like, the idea of clear cutting and the idea of other things. I pretend not to I don't understand it all. But I do know that it sounds like clear cutting isn't a good idea. I don't know, just saying.
Okay, so let's pick up on that then, Alison, and riff off of what Matt just had to say. Yes or no, clear cutting is good for the environment, good for the climate?
Sounds like not a great idea, but I definitely do not side hustle as a forester, so I know very little on that topic. Friends I talk to about having this conversation, they're like, wow, are you really into sustainable forestry? And we didn't know. I'm like kind of an anti-expert, but it sounds like a terrible idea. But it might be good to look at like, how are we using our forest products? Are we making the best use of them? What kinds of policy and changes can we implement so that when we are harvesting trees, that we're making the best use of them, and that we're making sure that, these like earthly treasures are being stewarded appropriately, and that we have an opportunity to make good informed choices. And I'm not sure what that looks like in terms of what kinds of changes could make the most impact, whether it's simply being like more minimalist and buying less, or whether that's looking at what kinds of practices go into like how these products are processed and turned into products, and what kind of norms we have around the use of like even paper. And I'm an author, and I'm like hear a lot about the cost of paper in terms of book production, and so really looking at some solutions to make sure that we're maximizing what we do harvest.
Can we actually like sort of define clear cutting? Because I mean, forestry is renewable. We know that, right? You cut a tree down, you can plant another one. That's great. But if you pave over a forest, that's a little more difficult. So what are we talking about when we talk about clear cutting? Are we talking about it's gone forever, or it's something that could be grown back? That would help, I think, understanding the context of this conversation, of where that's concerned.
Well, and I think, Candace, that's actually where we wanted to get to, is that question that generally the kitchen table conversation, you think of clear cutting, I say it's all Joni Mitchell's fault. You think of cut down a tree and instantly it becomes a parking lot or a parkade or a shopping mall. Mm-hmm. And so I'll defer to Rob here, because I feel like you're just ready to jump in and give us the definition that we all kind of need to understand so that we can have the conversation here and then beyond.
Sure. And so that all sorts of thoughts as you folks have been presenting your ideas. Candace, I just wanted to go back to your one of your original thoughts about, what all the work that everybody's trying to do to reduce their footprint, and yet there are the few with the much that really are having a significant impact with their footprint. And what is it that we can do to curb that, or better address those situations? And I think when you ask the question, well, will forests save the world? For one, it's not the one magic bullet by any means. I think there's a whole question of what are people really willing to give up in order to turn around what we're doing to our planet. And putting things out in a blue box is great, but what about that trip you're taking, and going around the world and things like that? Like it's those kind of questions I think that people really need to get their heads around.
And concrete. Like
concrete,
when I read Bill Gates' book, the first thing that jumped out at me was that most of our greenhouse gas comes from concrete.
Yes.
How on earth do we even start to address that?
Yes. Well, and so, and not to get to the bottom of the whole use of forest products, but if I could just go there for a second. So if you think about wood and trees growing, trees sequester carbon dioxide. They sequester maximum amounts of carbon dioxide when they are growing well and are healthy. And at the time that those trees may be cut down by the forestry sector, that wood then goes and stays as a wood product, which 50% of it is in fact carbon. And so when you're not only using a sustainable product, you're not only taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but in fact, when you put it into those wood products, you're keeping it in carbon well beyond the natural life cycle of the tree. So you not only sequester all the carbon that it's doing through the life of the tree, but you're offsetting some of those other building materials that you might otherwise be using, like concrete, like steel, that have extremely significant footprints. So there's that part of the equation, which is really kind of down at the end, like it's the end of the story. When we start, with the question of clear cutting, and again, Candace, great question about, and the Joni Mitchell reference, when in fact you take a forest away and you change its land use, say you remove it, you strip it, and you turn it over to agriculture, or you turn it over to a parking lot, as was referenced, that term is called deforestation. And it's the actual land use change from forest. When you go in and I'll get into the silvicultures of clear cutting, but if you go and if you cut a forest and just walk away from it, eventually it's going to come back. And it's the management of that process that will determine how quickly it can come back and how healthy will it be when it does come back. So as I'm sure you say, if you've seen an area that's been just abandoned for decades, you'll see that, the succession plants will start moving in, grasses start coming in, early successional species, tree species will start coming in and more or less take over that area over a very long period of time. But if you pave it, you really have changed that land use. So that's deforestation. With regards to the term of clear cutting, and I think what a lot of folks, may already know about, and Matt, you kind of referred to this, is Canada, as you said, it has huge, vast tracts of forest. In fact, we have in Canada the third most forested lands in the world, some 9% or so, only to be with Russia and US having slightly more. What's really interesting about Canada is that the majority of our forested land is publicly owned, as in it's not privately owned. And because of that, we have an extremely significant regulatory system that addresses how we manage those forests. And predominantly, the notion is in Canada is, in particular in Ontario, which I'm more familiar with, but the notion there is we want to make sure that we keep the kind of forest that we have. We don't want to just strip it clear and plant a bunch of trees in rows, it's all the same species, and grow fiber. That's not that. Other jurisdictions around the world do that. What we work towards is ensuring that we have the multiple types of forests that exist on our landscape. So you think of Northern Ontario, right across North Canada, as the boreal forest. And that's a very unique kind of forest. It has the origin, the significant nature of natural disturbance of the boreal is fire, and fire takes out usually large tracts of land. And then you get down into the Great Lakes St. Lawrence type of forest, which you might be familiar with, kind of what Algonquin Park is, the tolerant hardwoods, the maples, the beech, the hemlocks. Those natural disturbance patterns that affect those types of forests are wind and downbursts of wind and take out a few trees at a time. So and those forests, they progress, they succeed as those types of forests. With the boreal, again, the natural succession is fire. And so if we think of the whole notion of maintaining that forest on the landscape, you want to emulate natural disturbance patterns. And I'm specifically saying emulating, not completely comparing the two. So when you do that, and in a forest like the boreal forest, there's species like jack pine, there's poplar, there's spruce, black spruce, tamarack, white birch. All of these species are, and I'm sorry, I'm going into a bit of a forestry lesson here maybe, but just gives you a little bit of the background on why we do what we do. All of those species are called early succession species. All of those species have adapted to fire and in fact need full sunlight to grow. So when a fire comes through in the boreal forest, there's species like the jack pine, it releases its cones. Because of the heat of the fire, it opens up and lets the seed come out of the cone, and that forest comes back as an even age stand. So all the trees there are coming back, same age, and they'll grow. And at some point in the future, another fire is going to come through, wipe it. There's just this natural disturbance, probably come through, the periodicity of it's probably 80 to 100 years, 120 years, somewhere in there. Come through, wipe it out again, and the forest it starts over. So it's constantly, being, I'll call it, burnt out, and then coming back at this even-aged forest. When you get into the Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest, where you have those downbursts of wind, you think of individual trees being taken out, the big overmature trees. And from there, the seedlings underneath the canopy have adapted to be able to respond to the sun. So when you think of a maple forest, usually you'll see multiple ages of trees within that forest, little trees, medium-sized trees, and really big trees. So those trees are an uneven age stand versus the boreal. So when we get back to our silvicultural systems, of which here in Ontario there's three, there's the clear-cut silvicultural system, the shelter woods silvicultural system, and the selection. Those are all designed to work towards ensuring that type of forest that they're applied to stays that type of forest moving into the future. And the reason you want to do that is because of the biodiversity that provides. You've got the multiple forest types and multiple land use pattern types that are going to maximize the biodiversity on those particular forests. So when the forestry sector does a clear cut in these areas, and they're not taken out in square blocks. The clear cut are taken out trying to emulate what a fire would look like. So that's very ragged edges to it. It may leave peninsulas of trees there that normally, wouldn't necessarily burn in a fire. You move around wetlands and things like that. So you're really working towards that picture of a burn. And when you do that, and then either you're going to come back in and seed the area, or you come back and the trees that are left, some of them are seed trees, seed the area, you're going to get that even age stand back again. So that's why we say clear cutting. I mean, that's the whole premise of clear cutting. What we're trying to do is to make sure that when the forest comes back, it's going to come back as that jack pine, spruce, tamarack, white birch, poplar type of species that are there that service all the other critters and things that are in that particular area. So that's
okay. So let's. That's an important distinction in terms of how we're going to deal with this. So Matt, does that change your mind in terms of what the clear cut process does?
It doesn't change my mind. I think that again, I'm not an expert in any of this, but I remember seeing, having had presentations and things from, industry, environmentalists and things, when you do a cut that's done that's environmentally friendly, the forest comes back even better than what it is when it's just bulldozed over or whatever. So I think, but again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it depends on the province in which you live, right? So if you have a jurisdiction that doesn't really care about protecting forests, you're not going to have the regulations and the laws in place to protect those forests, correct?
Well, you certainly have to have the political will to ensure that the regulatory framework is in place to manage and sustain those forests. And you have to also have public lands. And I know there's some provinces that, the majority of their land is privately owned, similar to what's the land ownership out in the eastern provinces. So there may not be that same mandate to ensure that the forest cover and that ecosystems are sustained the way that I described. What's interesting to know too is just in Canada in general, there's certified, you probably heard of FSC, Forest Stewardship, Forest Standard Certification, SFI, which is a Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and CSA. So these are certification bodies. Canada, because of this regulatory framework that we have, because we have so much private, publicly owned lands, in fact, 38% we have in Canada, 38% of the world's certified forests. And again, these are certification systems that by third parties that address the sustainability of the systems being used to manage those forests. And they can or cannot be applied to private lands. It's a purely voluntary process. But as far as our public lands go, we're way beyond any other country in the world for that certification.
One of the things that's come up, and Alison, you brought this up a little bit, is kind of like our individual choices and actually understanding the impact of the innovation in forestry. And something that we've been exploring at length, and I don't know if the room has feelings on this, is that, we're not leveraging, frankly, wood enough in any of our development planning. We're not using mass timber. What I was surprised to learn, I understood the concept of carbon sink and carbon offsetting, but like my desk right now that I have my computer on is housing carbon. All of the wood stuff in my house is helping to offset that. So I guess I'll drop this one into the middle of the table too, is like, did you know that was possible and that's happening at scale? Like, what questions do you have about that? Because I had a million.
I wish I could drop you in as a fly on the wall in some of the conversations in this house that happen, because I lose my mind trying to figure out the best way to do things for the environment. And I go around in circles. So it's interesting that you bring that up because, we had all these trees come down. We had this storm come through in May that knocked down about 16 trees in our yard. Old trees. I was devastated. They were just beautiful. And I was, upset that this happened and ruined the environment. Then, we had to clean it up. That took months and months, and cutting it. And I was like, oh, well, good. So like, we can use this, we can burn this, we can use this to heat the house. And then it was like, well, that releases carbon into the air. Is that better, cleaner? I don't know. And so it just becomes, you start to go in a circle. Am I doing the best thing for the environment? And now that it's obviously dead wood, it is releasing carbon in the air as well. Is that correct, Rob?
Yeah, as it rots, the wood rots, it will release the CO2 back in the atmosphere. Correct.
Right. So it's just, I don't know. Like, again, I twist myself in knots over this stuff. So no, Aaron, I didn't know that about my wood desk that is right here, and I'm very happy. But also I worry about using it too much, or if it's a dirty heating source, for example, as opposed to, say, natural gas or, electricity. So I'd love to hear the thoughts on that.
Can I just before we do this, in as much as you come from a family of carvers, I thought that's fascinating, Alison, and the whole relationship with the wood is something in and of itself, and it's an expression of art and creativity. So it stores that along with the carbon. I just want to point that out. But the idea, and as people explained it to me, so whatever carving you have manifest, I give it as a gift, and it might be something that my grandkids hang on to for their grandkids. It occurred to me that the wood that, from the tree that you took your carving, that carbon sequester gets passed on as a piece of heritage, right? I mean, it's kind of an interesting way to look at it. And to your point around consuming what we need, this frames the conversation differently for me, I think, when we talk about our use of that product.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think about it in terms of, for context, when my great-great-grandfather was carving these masks, that activity was actually illegal because the ceremonies they were being made for was illegal. So the majority of his career, he was making art that wasn't legal. And, and I'm going to be acquiring a piece of my great-grandfather's carving soon. So I'll get to actually have one of those in our home. But when I think about like the impact of wood in those contexts, and that, we use the wood to make masks and things for ceremony, and the participation in ceremony and culture and language are things that are intrinsically tied to the wellness of Indigenous people. So there's an impact to the use of those products. It goes beyond, the practical use of an object in that respect. And also, like, these pieces carry, our culture into future generations. So, I think there's a lot of different impacts. I mean, the piece that I think about around forestry is, like, I understand why in some situations it would be necessary in order to emulate, like, normal natural occurrences that would remove a forest, but thinking about how does that impact the animal life and the people who depend on those as food sources, the people who hunt in those areas and where those would be their traditional territories. So I have curiosity.
Two great questions there. Rob, I'm going to let you stick handle both. First, let's get to the question that Alison asks about habitat and the commerce that might go on in that area, and then to Candace's point about, we had the same storm hit us. We were near Peterborough on that May 24 weekend, so we lost 4 trees on our lot, and it was the same thing. So the question then becomes, does that firewood are we just kind of giving up and coughing that carbon back up into the atmosphere? Or is there a way to actually use wood, burn wood, that has less of an impact?
Okay, so sure. So for the burning the wood part, and I guess, and Cash, you did ask the questions of, well, what would be better? Natural gas, other petroleum products, which of course those are all coming out of the ground. They're releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. That particular CO2 has been locked up for tens of thousands of years in the ground, as is oil, as is coal. And so certainly, that's the wood is a relatively short-term has locked up CO2 for a relatively short term in itself, and therefore when you burn it, it's not releasing, we'll call it the older CO2 that's been stored under the ground for like I said, tens of thousands of years. So, which is releasing new, that's new CO2 coming into the atmosphere for all intents and purposes, versus the wood it was taken out over 100 years, it's released back in. So the life cycle of that is relatively short compared to petroleum products. And it's, when you ask the question, it's interesting. I was at a seminar down in Kingston a while ago, and they had moved from ensuring that there was going to be, all of their transit was going to be moved towards electrical vehicles. And I would suggest that, okay, that's great. Unfortunately, here in Ontario, we have hydroelectric power, so we're not depending on coal or other sources like that for our electricity. But I always ask the question: it's great, do electricity, but what's the full upstream, downstream cost of electric vehicles when you look at batteries and you look at the manufacturing of those things, and what happens to the batteries once they're used up? So it's just choices, it's all about choices. So it's and I know too that certainly with the wood stoves that you get now, they are far more efficient than they certainly have been in the past. It's no longer just a barrel with a stovepipe out of it. They have catalytic converters in it and ways to really ensure that a lot of the gases are burned off. And so you're not just emitting just straight smoke back into the atmosphere. So I think that the technology has definitely improved from the wood stove manufacturing folks and making it more viable and more environmentally friendly to burn wood for your heating sources. With regards to the habitat, and Alison, that's such a great question, because as I said, when you look at the underlying principles of how we manage forests, it really does want to look at and ensure that all of those forests are there. And by ensuring that those forest cover types are maintained, it does ensure that the wildlife habitats are also maintained. And so certainly, and again, in the forest management plans that I've been involved in, it's identified, a lot of these, the species that are, living in the forest. And in fact, there's prescriptions written to ensure that those particular habitats are protected. And certainly there's prescriptions written to ensure that the shorelines are protected. And depending on the slope and depending on the the slope and the type of soils, the operations may be 300 meters back from the water edge. With hawk nests, you could have 50-meter reserves around those, or 100-meter timing restrictions, or all sorts of things that are there to look at those particular values and ensuring that you're minimizing the impact of those. And those prescriptions are called area of concern prescriptions, and they're developed by the planning team for a forest management plan. And the planning team consists of biologists, ecologists, foresters, planners, certainly the government representation there. So it's not just forestry people writing plans anymore. It used to be, in Ontario for sure, it was a timber management plan, totally focused on getting the timber out of there. That was all it was concerned about. In 1994, an act was passed, the Crown Forest Sustainability Act was passed, and it identified that all these other values needed to be addressed during the forest management planning process. And the public, because it's public lands, have that opportunity to bring their concerns and their values forward as part of that planning process. And they can identify themselves some values that they may have, not necessarily animals, but recreational trails. And I was involved in this, where a group came forward and said, we've developed cross-country ski trails through this particular area. And, not that the area is going to be completely removed from being harvested, but they said, we'd really appreciate, and, if you could just clear the trails off when you're done. And so and by the way, if you could just push a trail over here as you're pulling out some of the material, that'd be a great new trail for us to use. So a lot of time, really good communication between the local community groups and the forest industry to help identify these values. And certainly let the people have the opportunity to comment and put their values forward and work with the planning team to get them protected. So it's quite incredible. There's all sorts of guidelines and manuals identified for how to protect wildlife values. bird species, mammals, bears' dens, fish habitat, cold water, warm water fisheries and streams, and all those types of things that are considered during that process. Again, the underlying premise, if you make sure that forest type continues on, then you'll ensure that you have a maximum diversity of habitats available for the future.
One of my favorite memories of my grandfather, Rob, and for those of you in the room, he was a forester in Ontario. So the thread of him is through this whole podcast series. We've been talking a lot about him, but one of my favorite things, Dad, you probably remember this, is he tells a story of he used to go out there and he was a scaler and he'd measure the trees. And, I was little, so I didn't fully understand what he did, but I knew he was involved in controlled fires and putting out the fires when they needed to be put out. He'd go up in the plains and the bush plains and drop the water. But he would tell me stories as a little girl of rescuing. He'd say rescuing, but I'm sure there was a plan there. Like the moose and the baby wolves. Like there's a picture of him with a moose in the back of his truck, like a young moose that escaped one of the fires, right? From way back in I guess it would have been the early 60s, Dad, or the late 50s. So I appreciate that question, Alison, because I realize now that I always just knew that they saved the animals, not to overly simplify it, but that was always part of the plan was to rescue the animals.
For sure. Yeah. And it's kind of funny that the way our context shapes how we see, trees and forestry. We used to live on a Christmas tree farm. And so cutting down trees was like an exciting thing that happened at Christmas. And so when I took my toddler he's like 15 now, but when he was a toddler, we went to see the Lorax, and he saw all these people that were getting all upset about them cutting down trees. And he's kind of like, but that's like the best thing ever. And he's like cheering, and people are like, but like from his 3-year-old context, cutting down a tree means Christmas is coming, not like environmental devastation. So having that context and is really helpful so that we can think informed and understanding other people's perspectives too.
I'm laughing about that, Alison, because you wouldn't even believe the existential crisis I have over a Christmas tree. Do we get a real one or is it a fake one? Which one is better for the environment? And then I'm like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. I don't know what to do. It's just, unreal that the eco guilt is real. I think parents feel eco guilt in a massive way because we know what we're leaving behind for our kids. And so I agonize over ridiculous things.
But that's not such a ridiculous thing to have to consider. And I know, and so I'm going to wave the flag again for using real Christmas trees. And we've been advocating that for probably 15 years at Forest Ontario. And you're familiar with the distillery and the Christmas market that's down there? Yeah, the big Christmas tree that's been there. And we've been selling real trees down there for, as I said, for I think 12 years anyway. And our comment to people when they talk about the use of real trees versus artificial trees is they say, okay, so these are, again, they're grown locally. I think Ontario produces about 1 million Christmas trees per year. They're grown sustainably, so when a crop of Christmas trees is harvested, another crop is planted, so that there's always these trees coming along. The trees themselves, as I say, they actually smell fantastic when you get them put up. They're 100% biodegradable, and certainly when you finish using the tree, they could be used, and communities come around and pick them up and they may be used for mulch that goes into some of the gardens in the areas. They may be used for riverbanks to hold the shorelines. So and eventually they'll decompose. Compared to an artificial tree that was probably made overseas. So all of a sudden with plastics, with metals, and all of a sudden you're shipping that across the oceans. Studies have shown that artificial trees, although they will last longer, people tend to get tired of them and they'll dispose of them after 5, 6, 7 years. And of course, those end up into a landfill. They don't decompose. And so there you are, So again, it's kind of like, well, obviously, what my opinion is on whether we use a real tree or an artificial tree. But I think when people start to understand, again, the choices and why and the footprint and the bigger picture footprint, in particular, the transportation of these things, I think it's all about choices.
I just want to kind of jump in. Candace, that's amazing that, I think there are many people, families across the country who are able to make those choices. It's just like, I know so many people who are literally just trying to get by, and they don't care, right? Like the fact that the climate change crisis is literally the last thing on their mind.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's a big problem there. It's so big that it's like, going back to somebody said about, it's great to put a blue bin by the curb, or for here in Nova Scotia, compost, but like, to me, that's what I can do. Cause like, not me, but like people I know who are just they have 2 jobs, they've got 2 kids. They just came through a pandemic. This is the last thing in their minds.
So let me ask you this. When we hit stop record here and we're done, each of you is going to go have chats with your respective children, presumably this evening, unless, I don't know, you're going to talk to your kids. What are you now going to tell them at your kitchen table about what you took away from this conversation and the enlightenment that we got from Rob? Like, I still learn stuff. We've produced now probably 13 episodes, and I'm still learning something every single time. So, Matt, I'll start with you. What are you going to talk to the kids about, like, based on what you learned here today that maybe you didn't know about?
Yeah, I don't know if it's like a technical thing, but I think I heard it a couple of times around, we have these choices that we can make, and we do them already. We do a lot of them already in our house, whether it's, composting or, walking instead of driving up to the school or whatever. But we can always make choices, and better ones. And what does that look like when it comes to forestry?
Alison?
Well, I mean, I think back in British Columbia, we had the heat dome last year, which was really tragic and difficult. And I talked to my son about it. He had been watching depressing TikToks, and I was like, what do you think about all this? And he's like, well, we need to do something about climate change. And I was like, because he's 14, and I was just really surprised. I thought he was just going to whine about being hot. But I think what the conversation that we're going to have is to be kind of inform consumers about information around forestry, and to, look at the whole picture and to make the most of the choices that we do have available, and to get more information about, what those are. We all have different numbers of choices based on our situations, but being able to make the best choices, and one of those choices about who we vote for, and how they steward the land, and how they empower, local First Nations in terms of Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship, and how industry integrates traditional cultural knowledge in those choices that they make around the environment. So I think it's really an invitation to ask a lot more questions, and to be informed consumers about how we think about things and how we use the earthly gifts that we have in terms of our forests.
Candace, I'm sure that your conversation will be around getting the real tree.
Well, so my kids are 18 and 20, and if listening to me you think that I'm kind of angry about things, you should listen to them. I mean, they are pissed. They want massive change in this world, and they're gonna make it happen. So I don't know how much I need to tell my kids. Really, they're really in tune with stuff. But I think one of the most interesting things I heard today was that my furniture is like actually holding some carbon. I'm going to walk around and hug all my wood furniture in the house, and I'll share that with my kids, because I'm really pleased to hear that, because I honestly thought once it was cut down and made into something, it was done. Like it was, it wasn't holding anything anymore. It was sort of done contributing to the earth. So I'm pleased to hear that. But in terms of my kids, again, I just going to go back to the whole thing about how we're all tired, and my kids are looking at a lot of things right now. And I don't know that the forest is going to be top of mind for them, but certainly I'll tell them about the wood furniture. They'll find that very interesting.
Well, every day you're touching wood. So that's the kind of thing. And I think that sort of is the realization that, as Aaron and I have kind of gone through this, the awareness that we've come to is that every time we've touched something that's wood, we understand that we have invested in in fighting climate change. Whether we knew it or not, we were doing that. And what I loved, my takeaway today, just in terms of what you had to say, Alison, about the masks. So when those masks were, first carved by your great-great-grandfather, and it was illegal for him to do that, he was doing so for the sake of community identity. That gets passed along. But what he did not know is that he was giving us all the gift of the carbon storage in that mask. And that is not only about saving your culture, it does go towards saving the planet. So we have a lot to, and again, from this series, I know we have a whole lot more to learn from the indigenous approach and the relationship with the forests and now the wood product. I never thought of it in that way until you brought it up. So thanks for sharing that story. That was a great one.
And thank you, Rob. It's been a pleasure sitting at a kitchen table with the CEO of the forest.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just wonder, Erin, if I could just make one last comment.
For sure.
There was something Matt said earlier. I just wanted to just go back to that. It was, when we talked about forestry and just stopping harvesting everything, and you tied it into jobs. And I think, there's an incredible opportunity to enhance our green economy. And I think it's when you do and practice sustainable forestry, as all the protocols are associated with these third-party certifications, part of that is ensuring a healthy environment. And so practicing sustainable forestry and having a healthy environment is not an either-or situation. You can have sustainable forestry that actually enhances the environment. So I think, and creates all sorts of great jobs. So I think it goes hand in hand when we're talking about forestry and sustainable forestry. And as Canadians, in my opinion, we have the best managed forests in the world. And as Canadians, we should be proud of that and what we are doing to work towards addressing climate change because of that.
And just so you know, Rob, if you're from Nova Scotia or Cape Breton or Newfoundland, we call them jabs.
Jabs.
Okay.
Well, good jab all around. So thank you all. This has been great. And the only other thing I would say to you, and particularly in your conversation, Alison, about having better understanding of the information, I would suggest that you guys sit down and listen to this with your kids. Listen to the whole series, because there will be things that will come out of there that will resonate with that generation. And as I said before we came on, it's important for us to talk to our kids about it and our grandkids about it, but they're the ones who are going to carry the ball across the finish line here. And if we're at all going to be successful, it's going to be that group, that demographic, those excited and passionate brains in your household, Candace, that are going to be the ones that really sort of ignite the concern that is clearly urgent. Admitting that we're all tired, I get it. But that's why we need the young blood involved, I think, in this conversation. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
All right. Well, I hope you took good notes. That was a lot in that kitchen round table. So huge thanks to our wonderful guests on this episode, Candace, Alison, Matt, and Rob. And for Dave Trafford, as well as our producer, Becky Coles, and the rest of the SSN team, I'm Erin Trafford. Thanks for listening.
This podcast series is produced for Forestry for the Future. And for more information, I'd encourage you to visit the website forestryforthefuture.ca. And you may want to get involved in supporting a sector that's committed to growing a greener economy and driving our country towards a net zero carbon future for you and your kids. I'm Dave Trafford, and Canadian Forestry Can Save the World is produced by Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.